The small town of Eldermore, nestled on the edge of a dense forest known as the Silent Woods, was a quiet, almost forgotten place. The forest earned its name because no birds chirped, no animals made a sound, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath when passing through. Despite the ominous lore surrounding the woods, few ventured deep enough to verify the rumors, until Sarah did. Sarah, a 24-year-old woman from Eldermore, had a younger brother, Liam, who disappeared 2 years ago on a dare to explore the Silent Woods. Search parties found no trace of him except for his favorite red hoodie hanging from a gnarled tree branch at the edge of the forest. Sarah refused to believe he was dead. Something in her gut told her he was still alive, waiting for her to find him. One night, Sarah dreamt of Liam. His face was pale, his eyes wide, and his voice was barely audible as he whispered, "Find me before they do." She woke with a start, her room freezing cold despite the summer night. On her windowsill, a scrap of red fabric fluttered, and claw marks etched into the wood spelled out one word: run. But Sarah didn't run. Instead, she decided to venture into the woods armed with a flashlight, a map, and the locket Liam had given her on her 16th birthday. The locket always felt warm to the touch, as if it held a fragment of her brother's presence. The forest was unnaturally quiet as Sarah stepped onto the overgrown path. Every crunch of leaves underfoot felt deafening. She walked for hours, marking her trail with ribbons tied to branches. Her flashlight flickered, and she stopped to adjust it. When the light steadied, she noticed her ribbons were gone. Her heart pounded as she turned in circles, trying to find any sign of her trail. Then, she heard it. A soft, childlike giggle, faint and far away. "Liam!" she called out, her voice trembling. There was no response, only the sound of footsteps behind her, growing closer. As Sarah stumbled deeper into the woods, she came across a massive, ancient tree. Its bark twisted into grotesque shapes resembling faces. Faces frozen in screams, their eyes hollow and staring. She felt a pull toward the tree, as if it were alive and beckoning her. Suddenly, one of the faces turned its gaze toward her and whispered, "Leave, while you still can." Sarah backed away, but the ground beneath her gave way, and she fell into a hidden cavern. The cavern was vast and filled with eerie blue light, emanating from glowing fungi on the walls. The air was thick, and strange whispers filled the space. As Sarah explored, she found torn pieces of clothing, including Liam's hoodie, scattered across the ground. Then she saw them. Figures cloaked in shadow, their limbs unnaturally long, and their heads tilted at unnatural angles. They moved in jerky, puppet-like motions, their glowing white eyes locked onto her. One of them held a small, glowing orb in its hand. When Sarah looked closer, she realized it was a fragment of Liam's soul. A voice boomed through the cavern, deep and reverberating. "You have trespassed, mortal." The largest shadow emerged, its form constantly shifting between human and beast. It claimed to be the Keeper, the guardian of the Silent Woods. Sarah pleaded for her brother's soul, offering anything in exchange. The Keeper grinned, its teeth sharp and glinting. "To save him, You must take his place." Tears streaming down her face, Sarah agreed. The keeper placed a cold hand on her chest, and she felt her heart stop. Darkness enveloped her, and she woke up back at the edge of the forest, Liam lying unconscious beside her. When he stirred, his first word was, "Sarah?" Relief flooded her, but as she tried to speak, she found she couldn't. Her voice was gone. Her reflection in a nearby puddle revealed her eyes had turned hollow and white, just like the shadows in the cavern. Liam remembered nothing of his time in the woods. Sarah couldn't explain her sacrifice, but she knew she could never leave Elder Moor. At night, she wandered the silent woods, her shadow growing longer and her form becoming less human with each passing day. Some nights, travelers who dared enter the forest claimed to see a woman with hollow eyes watching them from the trees. They said her presence was both a warning and a curse, for those who ignored her gaze never made it out alive. The silent woods claimed another keeper, and they would claim more. It was a cold October night when Ellie moved into the old family home she had inherited. She didn't want to be here, but life hadn't given her much of a choice. Alone, with only the sound of wind brushing against the windows, she tried to settle in. But this house wasn't quite empty. Ellie walked through the dimly lit hallways, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floors. The air felt heavy, thick with something unexplainable. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Dismissing it as exhaustion, she climbed into bed, her mind racing. "It's just nerves," she thought. "New place, new surroundings." She pulled the blankets over herself and tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come easily. The sound started softly, barely audible at first, a faint scratching coming from the walls. Ellie froze, her heart pounding. "Mice," she thought, trying to calm herself. "It has to be mice." But deep down, she knew the sound was too deliberate, too steady, as if someone was trying to get her attention. When the morning light broke through the curtains, Ellie felt silly for being so afraid. She made her way to the kitchen, determined to shake off the unease. But as she poured her coffee, she noticed something odd. On the dining table sat an old, rusted key. She hadn't seen it there the night before. She didn't even own any keys like that. Picking it up, she felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't here before, she thought, her fingers trembling. She glanced around the room, half expecting someone to jump out at her. But she was alone. At least, she thought she was. Curiosity got the better of her. She remembered the locked door in the basement, the one her late aunt had always warned her never to open. She had laughed at the warning back then, but now, with the key in her hand, the urge to see what lay behind it was irresistible. As she descended the basement stairs, the air grew colder, each step accompanied by the sound of her heartbeat echoing in her ears. The door stood at the far end, small and unassuming, yet somehow terrifying in its simplicity. The key slid into the lock easily, too easily. The click of the unlocking door seemed to reverberate through the house. Ellie hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle. "Do I really want to know?" she thought. But it was too late to turn back. The door swung open, revealing a pitch-black room. The faint beam of her flashlight revealed little. A few dusty shelves, cobwebs clinging to every surface. But then, the light caught something. On the floor, in the center of the room, was a circle of old rotted candles. Inside the circle lay a mirror, its surface covered in smudges and streaks, as if someone had been desperately trying to wipe it clean. Ellie stepped closer, drawn to the mirror, despite every instinct screaming at her to leave. As she gazed into it, her reflection stared back. But something was wrong. Her reflection wasn't her own. The eyes were darker, the smile too wide, too knowing. Ellie stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. In the darkness, she could feel it. Something shifting in the air, something stepping closer. Ellie ran. She didn't know where to go, only that she needed to get away. But as she reached the top of the stairs, the door slammed shut in front of her. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Breathing heavily, she turned around, her back pressed against the cold wood. She could feel it now. It was no longer just in the mirror. It was here. The air grew colder. Shadows crept along the walls, and the faint sound of footsteps echoed from the darkness. But they weren't her footsteps. Ellie didn't dare move. She closed her eyes, hoping, praying that it would pass. But then she felt it. A hand, cold and skeletal, resting gently on her shoulder. The next morning, the house was silent. The door to the basement was ajar, swinging slightly in the breeze. The neighbors would later say they hadn't seen Ellie leave. Her car remained in the driveway. The lights in the house never turned on again. When a distant relative finally came to check on her weeks later, the house was empty. Only the mirror in the basement remained, and if you looked closely, you might see her face, trapped, forever watching. Some doors should never be opened. Some secrets should remain buried. Hidden deep in the woods of Maine, there's a place locals call the Whispering Forest. Travelers say the trees speak to you, luring you deeper until you're never seen again. No one dared to step inside, except for Ryan and his friends. They thought it was just a creepy story. They were wrong. Ryan, Emma, Lisa, and Jake were thrill seekers, always hunting for paranormal hotspots. When they heard about the Whispering Forest, it sounded like the perfect weekend adventure. Equipped with flashlights, cameras, and a sense of invincibility, they entered the woods at dusk. At first, everything seemed normal. Tall trees, scattered leaves, the occasional sound of an owl. But after an hour, they noticed something odd. No matter how far they walked, the trail never seemed to end. Jake joked, "Maybe the forest doesn't want us to leave?" His laugh echoed strangely, almost as if the trees were mimicking him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the group stopped to set up camp. While Emma was gathering firewood, she heard a soft whisper in her ear. "Emma, come closer." She froze, turning quickly, but no one was there. When she told the others, they laughed it off, assuming she was trying to scare them. But as they settled in for the night, the whispers grew louder. Ryan, Lisa, Jake. Each voice was faint, but unmistakably calling their names. By morning, the trail they had followed was gone. The forest seemed denser, darker, and unnaturally quiet. The group tried retracing their steps, but the compass spun erratically, and the GPS showed they were in the middle of a blank space. Panic set in when they realized their water bottles were empty, despite filling them just hours ago. Jake climbed a tree to get a better view, but when he reached the top, he screamed. "There's no way out. It's all trees, just trees." As he climbed down, his foot slipped, and he plummeted to the ground. The impact wasn't fatal, but his ankle twisted unnaturally. They had no choice but to carry him, as the voices close in. As they moved deeper into the forest, the whispers became clearer. They no longer seemed distant. They were right beside them, though no one was there. "Why are you here? You don't belong. Stay forever." Lisa, the most skeptical of the group, shouted, "It's just the wind. There's no one here." But as soon as the words left her mouth, a low growl rumbled from the shadows. Then came the laughter, high-pitched, mocking laughter that circled them, growing louder with every step. By nightfall, Jake was delirious, mumbling about faces in the trees. The group decided to rest again, though sleep was impossible. Ryan stayed awake, keeping watch, when he noticed Emma wasn't in her sleeping bag. He woke Lisa, and they searched frantically, calling Emma's name. They found her flashlight near a tree, its beam pointing upwards. When they looked, they saw something carved into the bark. 1 down, 3 to go. Ryan and Lisa tried to carry Jake, but he grew heavier with every step. Suddenly he stopped them, pointing at the trees. "Do you see them?" he whispered. Lisa screamed when she realized the bark wasn't bark at all. Faces, human faces, were embedded in the trees, their mouths moving as if whispering. Their eyes followed the trio filled with malice. Jake began laughing hysterically. "They're calling me. I have to go." Before they could stop him, he limped toward one of the trees and pressed his hands against it. The bark opened, swallowing him whole. Ryan and Lisa ran blindly through the forest, ignoring the whispers that now sounded like screams. They stumbled upon an old cabin, its windows boarded up. Inside, they found walls covered in names, thousands of them. At the bottom of the list were the names Emma, Jake, Lisa, and Ryan. Lisa broke down, sobbing. "We're going to die here." Ryan grabbed an old journal from the table. It belonged to someone named Thomas Hart, dated 1872. The last entry read, "The forest demands sacrifices. Once it calls your name, there's no escape. Leave if you can. But the forest always takes what it's owed." Lisa vanished an hour later. Ryan didn't even hear her scream. He just turned around, and she was gone. The whispers now spoke only to him, taunting him, mocking him. When he stumbled back to the trailhead, he saw a figure waiting for him. It was Emma, her face pale, her eyes empty. "Come with me, Ryan," she said in a hollow voice. He turned to run, but the forest was alive now, branches twisting and grabbing at him. As the faces in the trees laughed, he tripped, falling into the earth itself. A week later, a group of hikers found Ryan's camera near the edge of the forest. The final recording showed Ryan running, screaming, as the trees closed in. In the background, a whisper could be heard. "The forest always wins." None of the hikers returned. So finally the story ends. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button and tell me in comment section on which topic you want me to make the next horror story video.